The future of food is being created as we speak, and the science fiction of today might become the science fact of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist, innovator, and author. Each week, we explore today's signals to reveal tomorrow's possibilities. We'll challenge assumptions, we'll question conventional wisdom, we'll imagine what could be, and talk to the innovators who are shaping what will be. This is the Tomorrow Today Show. Let's get started. Hello, world. It's Mike Lee here. We are back with another episode. Today is the Future of Regeneration. We are going to go under the hood and dissect a topic that some people think they intuitively kind of know, but we have a really great panel of co-hosts and guests here today that we want to get deeper onto this concept of regeneration and sort of show you what you might not have noticed about it, what you might not have been thinking about it, and show you how it applies not only to regen ag, which we've probably heard that term a lot in the food industry, but everything else, to business, to relationships, to parenting, what have you. So that is the topic of today. We have some great guests on the podcast later on. We have Karen Rodriguez. She's the COO of Kiss the Ground of the film fame, which made huge waves and headlines when it came out a couple of years ago. And then we also have Heather Terry, CEO of a company that is focused on regeneration called GoodSAM, and we'll have those two guests coming on us shortly. As usual, though, I am not by myself here. Today's guest co-host is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He lives and breathes this stuff in regeneration, and he's one of the go-to people about this topic. And honestly, the first person I thought of when I thought, like, let's do a Future of Regeneration episode. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest co-host today is Ethan Soloviev. He is Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood. Ethan, how you doing?
Awesome. So glad to be here.
Thanks for being on here. We've had so many kind of conversations about this in the past, and this is the first time we've gotten to kind of commit this to a medium. So I'm excited to dive in, and maybe let's start at the beginning. I'm gonna play the intentionally naive fool for a little bit to get people level set here. What is regeneration?
First of all, you are not a naive fool in any
I'm
sense of the
playing.
word.
I'm playing.
And also, we may not level set per se. Level set kind of comes from the idea that you work with people where they're at. I don't generally tend to work with people where they're at. I seek to be like a couple steps beyond where I am and a couple steps beyond where they are, so we can like walk somewhere together and try to get to a place that we aren't. First, because we're talking about the future here, but also because if we just stick with what we already know, what we already have, then we're not actually going to regenerate anything. We're not actually going to move anything. Famous physicist David Bohm once likened this to the difference between thinking, which he said we actually don't think very much. Most of the time we're just thoughting, which means we're saying things that we've said before and just kind of thoughting them out loud again. Most brainstorming is this. A lot of conversations are just people sharing what they've already thought before to a new person. What we're going to try to do is get to thinking and see if you and I can't generate some new, regenerate some ideas that we never have here before. And that is part of the heart of regeneration. To answer your question, regeneration is a cosmology. It is a paradigm. It is a way of seeing, designing, and acting in the world that is sourced from thousands of years of indigenous, scientific, sacred, practical lineages from all around the world. Many cultures, many peoples have their own intuitive engagement with regeneration, and regeneration tends to create something that never existed before and tends to uplift, renew, recreate, and really birth again for whatever subject you're looking at, whether that's food and agriculture, whether that's business, whether that's investing, whether that's parenting. We're generating something new that was not there before that has a net positive impact on nested circles of reality.
Yeah. So let's contrast that with the word, because most people have probably heard regeneration in the context of regen ag, especially if you're listening to this because you're in the food space. Obviously, people have been talking about regen ag for a while now, even though it's a thing that's existed for way before people were talking about it recently. But how would you contrast the word and the mentality of regeneration versus the other word that people are used to hearing, which is sustainable?
Well, I mean, there's a number of ways to do it. One way to think about it is just, what does sustain mean? It means to keep it as is, and that's just not what we need. We don't want to sustain the current state of environmental degradation of 50 million people in slave labor. That number went up recently since the last time they released the report. We're not just in a like sustain massive. We're like in the sixth massive extinction of species on the planet. We don't want to sustain this. We actually have to heal. We have to regenerate. So I think that's a major difference. You can also think of it on like a spectrum. And I've done this, for 15 years now. If you look at a spectrum, and on one side is degenerate or degrade, and the other side is regenerate, sustainable falls right in the middle. Sustainable is like right in the middle, net zero. It's
Do
fine.
no
It's better
harm.
than degradation, but it's not really where we want to go. And an easy way to think about like what you want to be doing is if you're on your deathbed and somebody asks you like about what kind of impact did you have in this life, and you're like, about net zero. That's not really what you want to say on your
Yeah.
deathbed. Or how's your relationship with your sweetie doing? It's sustainable.
That's
Like,
the joke I always lean on is, that'd be really weird to say that, like, "Oh, my marriage is sustainable." It's like, "Oh, you okay?"
also, I mean, and just to bring this into the global context, like most agriculture isn't sustainable. Most agriculture isn't resilient. We're far from regeneration. And I mean, it's actually an amazing feat to get to sustainable for a length of time in a marriage or, in an agricultural landscape or in a business. So it's not that sustainable is bad. We're not trying to trash sustainable here. It's great. It's
Mhm,
just the paradigm of sustaining leaves us where we're at. It leaves us trying to do less harm. It leaves us trying to get, if we set the goal of sustain, this is like Zen and the art of archery, right? You don't aim at the target, you don't aim at the bullseye itself. If you do, you're more likely to fall short or go to the side. What you do is you aim at a spot that's 300 yards through the bullseye and beyond. Then
mhm.
you're more likely to actually hit it on the way.
Gotcha, gotcha. So this regenerative mindset, and you kind of mentioned that by and large, the ag system globally today is largely kind of degenerative. Now, conceptually, I understand what that means. Something is going to degenerate the environment or whatever. Something's going to regenerate it. But can we go a little level deeper and kind of like pointing out like why um, the system is degenerative today, and if we're regenerating, what are we regenerating when it comes to ag?
Yeah, I think in ag, one of the issues is that we focus on ag as if it's a separate part. That's also one of the characteristics of sustainability is you separate things into the different categories. We got food over here, we got water, we got energy, we got people. They're all separate categories. So we try to dissect it. You actually used that word earlier. You said we're going to dissect regeneration. I was like,
I did.
no, we're not going to do that. We're going to look at it as one whole, and see how do you regenerate a whole living system. So not just the ag, but we should look at regenerative food systems. But to drill down and to be on a particular farm, my farm in upstate New York, or many farms and many agroecological systems around the world, we're looking at regeneration holistically. So we're not just looking at soil. Too much of what is called regenerative agriculture says it's all about the soil, and you got to do this to the soil and protect the soil and add to the soil. And I think that's fine. I love soil, but soil is one aspect of a a beating heart living system. And so when we're talking about regeneration, yes, we're regenerating soil, increasing soil organic matter, increasing soil biodiversity, water holding capacity in the soil. But then right there's water holding capacity. So you're actually healing the water and the water cycle in a place, so that instead of polluting water, which is most of what happens out there currently, it's actually, an agriculture system could clean water. Water could leave the site cleaner than when it arrived. You can also have, in a large scale, which you really need to think about for regeneration at the landscape scale, which fortunately more and more of the world is starting to look at, and figure out how to fund regeneration at landscape scale. Then you can even create water. You can create clouds, right? If you have the forest in the right place coming off the coast, that can actually literally make it rain more inland than before. So plus the biodiversity, plus the human beings and other species that are there, having a greater diversity, a cultural diversity, a food diversity, a language diversity, thriving, ecologically based, agroecologically based incomes for the people, self-determination and autonomy for the people, the producers in each place. I would say, just to do one thing, that I don't generally go out and name or label farming degenerative. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come off well to most farmers who are allies and incredible innovators. I have laid out in the past a series of paradigms of agriculture, which are sort of like bigger ways that people think about and engage in agriculture. And the level where we usually start, there's 4 levels. The level where we usually start, which is legitimately and not with any moral judgment, just a place where a lot of agriculture is extractive,
Mm-hmm.
where basically we're seeking to extract value, usually
Mm-hmm.
financial capital value, through the living capital in a place. Often what happens is, when you're doing that extraction for that often financial bottom line, we end up um, overusing, degrading the living capital in a place, but you're extracting financial capital value. From there, people move to this next level of like, well, maybe we shouldn't extract so much value. Maybe we should do less harm. We should protect. We should conserve. So the conservative level is kind of it's not just different things you do, it's ways that you think. In the
Mm-hmm.
conservative level, we're saying, okay, how do we minimize water usage? How do we optimize our fertilizer applications? How do we make more efficient our spray program? We go from a calendar spray to an IPM based on exactly when the pests are there spraying. All of these are doing less harm. And that's a big step going from extractive to conservative. There's huge gains that have been made. There's more we can do in efficiency. AI really helps with efficiency. We'll talk about that later. But these are just the first 2 kind of levels of thinking. I can keep going, but I don't know. Did you have a question before we go to the upper
No,
levels?
keep going, because we almost got there. I mean, I think that's a great framework. So the outer circle is that extractive, and then conservative, which is let's do less harm, let's not blow the whole thing up while we're extracting from it. What comes after that?
The next step, and there is a kind of a phase shift here, and I think of these as they're like different worlds, right? When you go from doing less harm, which, by the way, most sustainable agriculture, so-called sustainable
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, the mindset, the thinking is very much in that conservative agriculture realm. Um, there's a phase shift when we go to the next level, which I've called net positive or net contributive. And at this level, the thinking, the decision making, the approach, the principles change to, how do I add value to this system? Not how do I do less harm, but how do I increase the carbon in the soil? How do I enhance biodiversity? How do I increase livelihoods as opposed to just like hit a minimum wage? That is the net positive thinking, where you start to add value to the farm itself. And maybe you start to get some thoughts of like, well, we should go beyond the farm itself. Could we add value to the larger system around it? You start to get that idea, because you see that what you do contributes to what's around you, and what other farmers and landowners and communities are doing around you is impacting your place. So you start to build this sense of interconnectivity. Agroecology and permaculture sort of ride these lines. They have some in the conservative, do less harm thinking, but they have some principles that are really about net positive adding. Very little agriculture gets here. I'll say there's a couple different stats out there that people call to and use. I admit I've been on some of the teams that made some of them, but I don't agree with a lot of what's out there about people say, 10 to 15% of all ag land in the world is regenerative. Bullshit. Like, we're so far from that. Especially, like, I don't even know if we're 10 to 15% at net positive, at net contributive at this point. I think maybe 10 to 15% of the world's agricultural land has some practices on it that are sometimes considered, quote unquote, and I never say this word, I'm only saying it in order to say don't say it, regenerative practices. But regenerative practices actually don't exist. There are agricultural practices, but those practices have different effects in different places. And this is one of the things I'm kind of building up towards, that top level of thinking, which is beyond net positive. Outcomes are the key to regenerative agriculture. And
Mhm.
practices like no-till or cover cropping or crop rotations or animal integration or feed additives or agroforestry, these are all approaches or practices. Depending on where they're done and how they're done, they may or may not have a regenerative outcome. And so
So
we
I
don't
think that go ahead.
go, you, no, you.
I think that's an interesting point to pause on, right? Because I think for decades, and I'm speaking from the point of view as kind of a layperson who's just going up and down the aisles shopping, right? We've heard about organic for a really long time. And I think most people kind of understand on a general level that, oh, okay, organic means no pesticides. So if you don't have pesticides, you get the organic stamp. People feel better about buying them in theory, and it gets you 20% higher on that box of salad, yada, 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 right? I've observed that there's a lot of tendency to apply that mentality of the organic standard onto what regenerative is. So when they
Mm,
do hear like, oh, this farm, and maybe if they know some of those techniques, they say like, oh, regenerative ag is no till, you know?
right, right.
So like how do we kind of get around that? Because it's not just thinking about the organic framework and just sliding in different parameters to be regenerative. It's actually a very different way of thinking it. Like, can we kind of like pause on that and just focus? Like, how do you have to bend your mind a little bit to get out of thinking in an old school organic framework? I'm not trying to bash organic, by the way, by any means. It's just a different kind of way of looking at it. But like, how do you kind of pivot from the organic way of thinking to the
Yeah.
regenerative way of thinking?
So I would say it's not a necessary, it doesn't have to be a pivot. Organic and regenerative are allies. There
Yeah.
should be zero fighting complaints between the movements, but they're different movements and they come from different paradigms. They have different sources and ways of thinking. The organic standard is made up of practices, and you achieve an organic standard or certification by doing those practices, by not spraying synthetic pesticides. Doesn't actually mean no pesticides. We've got a bunch of organic approved pesticides and fungicides and stuff as well, but it does mean no synthetic pesticides. Like, there are some ways of thinking in organic that are the conservative, the do less harm. We can still use pesticides, but we can't use synthetic pesticides. So oftentimes, and especially some expressions of organic, are very efficient. They're very optimized. They're very conserving water or soil. And that's great. You also find organic farmers who are pushing towards regeneration. They are thinking in a net positive level of how do I, and most organic farmers are thinking about how do I add value to the soil? How do I increase the carbon and the water holding capacity and the aggregate structure? How do I add value into the system? How do I increase biodiversity? So I guess I wouldn't even, I would say, from my perspective, organic is awesome. I certainly farm in accordance with organic principles on my farm. But there's something that happens at regenerative in two different ways that I think is distinct and useful. One of them is the real shift to an outcomes based framework, measurement, and approach to not what exactly are the practices we're doing, but what are the outcomes that I achieve? What actually happens
And
based on what I'm doing?
and that's a big one because organic more or less is sort of like don't use the synthetic pesticides and that kind of just applies no matter where you are, versus two farms on the opposite sides of the country could do completely different practices but still be regenerative, right?
Yeah. And I would say most organic farmers and practitioners know that, but it's a deeper core aspect of regenerative agriculture to say context matters. Each farm is absolutely unique and specific, and we have to design the crops, the principles, the methods, the management, the decision making to that individual farm, to that each place. Farming in California is different than New York, different than India, different than Australia, different than the Pacific Islands. And so the approach to agriculture, there can't be a set of practices that you do or do not do everywhere. You have to say, what works here and how do we apply our thinking, not just to certify the products or make the farm itself a certain way. When you step into the regenerative level, which by the way, I haven't even hit or quite talked about the regenerative level yet, right? We're
Well,
in
we're
this
getting there. We got
just to
time.
map where we've been. We've been in the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
extractive realm. We've gone to conservative. We're kind of looking at net positive, net contributive, and we're reaching towards what might be regenerative. Now, one thing that is interesting is that regenerative agriculture is a very quickly growing movement. I say
Mhm.
it's the fastest growing environmental movement on the planet, even despite recent political weather. Actually, it might get a bump. Who knows? Let's see. Let's
Yeah.
see what happens. But there are farmers who never thought about being organic, who considered it a fringe hippie thing and just like would never do it, who are very happily and proudly stating that they are moving towards regenerative agriculture. And that is fascinating and important from my perspective. Regenerative has done something. The concept of adding value, the concept of heading towards net positive, we like that. That just feels better. People can get on board with that as opposed to I'm restricted. I can't do that. I can't do this. And it's focused on the outcomes. If we agree on the outcomes that we want together, enhanced farmer livelihoods, enhanced biodiversity on the farm and beyond, increase resilience to drought and flooding because of the organic matter in the soil. Those are outcomes that we can work on and move towards together. And so I think that's part of why regenerative is growing so quickly. And it seems that some of the other movements, rightly or wrongly so, feel a little salty about how quickly regeneration is growing. And part of that aspect that I just described has to do with much of the world produces food in a large scale industrial growing, mostly monoculture system. A large part of the commodities of the world come from smallholder farmers, especially in the tropics and global south. And there's another force at play aside from individual farmer and producer love and engagement of the concept of doing good as opposed to doing less bad, which is just a little like less sexy. There's another factor, which is the interplay of companies, especially global corporations, in the pushing forward and inviting forward of regenerative agriculture in the world. And so I think we'll talk about that more as we go on, but as opposed to a fully from the ground up movement, regenerative is coming from both sides. Regenerative is
Mhm.
coming from the small agroecological farmers in Ecuador or in Thailand who are doing incredible work, and from Midwest row crop farmers, and from producers in the Northeast and Southeast U.S. Like it's coming up, but then at the same time, when I go to the climate COP or to Davos for the World Economic Forum with my company HowGood, the highest level executives in the world, the CEOs of major global companies, are also talking about regeneration proudly. They're investing in regeneration. They're making commitments to tens, hundreds of millions of acres going into regenerative agriculture. And they're inviting their teams and they're pushing their teams to move the ecosystem towards regeneration. So there's this bottom up, top down from all sizes of companies that is really expediting, accelerating the growth of regen ag in the world.
And the motives of the people coming from the big firms and the motives of the people coming from like smaller farms, are they in sync? Are they kind of the same motives? Are they both going towards it for the same reasons? Or are there maybe nuances in why they might be exploring regeneration?
I wouldn't say the same, but I would say harmonious. Like there is a deeper, and again, harmony is an interesting thing. Harmony doesn't mean alignment. Harmony doesn't mean the same. It means that the thoughts of the farmers and the thoughts of executives and directors around the world um, can they sing a different note, but those notes sound good together.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
I think there's gaps too. I think there's discord. I think there's places where, big companies pitch things and say they're regenerative, but really are just doing the same old sustainable or conservative or extractive and just like giving it the hot new label. That happens too, for sure. But I think the deeper will, at least the people that I work with and partner with inside these companies, they really actually do care about farming livelihoods, ecological and social health. Like they do want that to increase, and they see that by increasing, they get more resilient. Therefore, their supply systems get more resilient. They also see that the upcoming generations of millennials, Gen Zs, even Gen A are psyched about regeneration and doing good for self and good for planet. And so there's a profit alignment that comes in also, where sustainably marketed products actually sell better in the marketplace definitively over and over again for the last decade. And so there is this harmony that happens where executives want it because it can actually raise their top line revenues and secure their bottom line, profitability because of risk reduction and greater resilience, while also driving positive outcomes for farmers on the ground around the world. So it can line up.
I another misconception I hear a lot, and again, this is not my thinking, but I just hear people kind of bandy this about, is that switching to regenerative is another one of those hippie woo woo things where I'm actually going to start losing money if I go regenerative and things like that. How would you kind of dispel that myth, and what's the truth? Because I've heard examples from you and others where farmers go regenerative and they actually find themselves to be more profitable. So that seems like a clear cut case of dispelling the myth, but how would you kind of attack that myth?
Yeah, I would just go talk to the farmers who are doing it and ask them why they're doing it. Really, it's not even my place to say. Like the
What would they
science that's
say?
out there,
Yeah.
they'd say adopting this way of thinking has made me less reliant on external inputs, and that's lowered my cost. They'd say I might be farming less acres, but I'm farming them more profitably. They would say that I needed to do some learning. I needed a community to learn from. I needed technical assistance. Sometimes I needed to invest in new equipment or machinery or know-how or seeds. And there sometimes is a transition period, although that I would say there's a myth there, or not to say it's a myth. Sometimes it happens without top-notch agronomy that when you transition towards regeneration, yeah, there's a period of time that it takes to learn. Sometimes yields drop in that time. Sometimes they go up. Sometimes costs go up in that time. Sometimes they go down. So there's some diversity. But you do see after a period of a few years, generally, there's a case study out from WBCSD. OP2B did a case study on this in the US. There's a number of documented cases where there's a transition period, but then the longer term looks really good profitability wise for farmers, and it has to. And that's why regenerative agriculture is growing quickly,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
because it actually works on a financial capital bottom line, as well as that ecological and social bottom line.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a lot about ag, and this idea of extractive ag migrating towards regenerative ag. If we go up kind of one level, because ag doesn't exist in a vacuum, ag is a business. Like, can you have regenerative ag without regenerative business? And what is regenerative business? Like, if we're not thinking in the context of taking care of the soil and the plants to regenerate, which I think a lot of people intuitively understand, what does it mean to have a regenerative business?
I love this question. I think I'm going to walk there by at least touching that regenerative level in the frame we've been doing, which is walking through farming and agriculture, and then we'll transfer it over to business and economy and investing. Um, when you get above that net positive level, a number of things start to happen. When you get to the regenerative paradigm of agriculture, a number of things start to happen. At the regenerative paradigm, um, we stop thinking about individual little farms, and we look at a whole. We look at the life shed, like a watershed, but larger. We look at the landscape scale, and it's not just water fragmented away. It's the water integrated with the ecological, geological, social, and cultural systems in that place. And each place then is seen as unique. It has its own unique essence. It has its own terroir, is how we know about this from wine and more from spirits. But you get it from vegetables too. There are vegetables that only come from one place and only taste a certain way when you grow them in that place. One of my favorite examples of this is a spice company. My buddy Ethan at Burlap and Barrel has these incredible spices. You cook with them too.
I love
That
them.
just like the flavor that comes from them expresses the tingly, citrusy, high mountain, wild Sichuan pepper relative that like only comes from that place. And so there's a uniqueness of flavor. There's a uniqueness of story. There's a uniqueness of farming tradition that's integrated with a cultural tradition, right? It's agriculture. They're together. When you get to the regenerative level, agriculture is not separate from culture. They are
Hmm.
woven together as one interbeing whole. And then, so we've got a whole place, we've got the uniqueness of that place. And then the agriculture, when you're doing regenerative agriculture, you're not just focusing on what you can extract from it or how much less bad you can do or what the good you can add to the soil is. You're actually looking at the potential of that place. What can that place produce uniquely that nothing else can? What products could I make? Jesse Smith over at White Buffalo Land Trust in Santa Barbara, he's got a products company called Figure Eight, and they're producing these flavors. They made a persimmon vinegar that was from persimmons that were going to waste, but it was the most delicious. Like I've never had anything that had that flavor. That's potential coming out of a place that couldn't have existed without thinking in a regenerative way.
See, it's funny you say it that way because like I could kind of put like the corporate MBA lens on that and say, oh, that's an innovation strategy.
It is.
It's
You
just
can put
more
that lens
make.
on.
How do you make more stuff? Yeah,
But it's a very powerful innovation strategy because to switch it over to business, the same thing I'm saying about agriculture is true for business. Each business is unique. Each business has its own unique singularity, its essence that nothing else can be or do. And when a company's doing well, you know the distinctiveness of the product and they innovate off it. Apple is an incredible example of that. Super iconic, distinctive products that still nobody else is quite matching. And so they can innovate off that and launch new things like the iPhone so many people have that defined the category, right? Coming from the unique core of that individual company. And it's possible for any company in the world, just like it's possible to understand the unique, specific terroir of a life shed and of a farm. You can do that for an individual business. And if a business knows that about itself, the whole of the business has a unique essence that then generates a potential that can develop. Development is this fourth. I'm walking through the principles of regeneration, by the way.
I love it.
I'm
Yep.
kind of quietly in the background. There's 7 principles. I just did the first 3. The fourth one is development, that there's always something new developing. That developing means take off the veil. So you're going from the distinctiveness of the company to offer a distinct new offering. And that is a source of innovation. And that also ultimately, if you're good at it, makes you non-displaceable in your market because nobody else can innovate exactly what you can innovate. Nobody else can grow those spices. Nobody else can produce that Albarino wine or that Burgundy wine or that that Gold Coast California mead. Like nobody else can, or that Irish single farm single barrel whiskey. Like that's very distinctive. That cannot be displaced in them.
But I think you could put it even fine. Okay, so the broaden the point even like and take it. You can have a regenerative mindset and have nothing to do with food or agriculture. Like, what would a
Absolutely.
regenerative law? Like, what would a regenerative law firm be like? Like, you'd say the same things, but you'd say like, no one offers client services like you guys, or nobody
No,
thinks
no, no.
about the
Client
law as
services is, yeah, it's
or
clients,
relate. No one forms relationships like you do.
but you're saying generic things.
Okay, how would you
Client
describe a
services,
regenerative law firm?
relationships.
I want to
I
push
haven't met
this
one yet.
metaphor. Okay,
Okay.
fine, but
No, I
invent
can
one.
describe it. I
How
can
would you
describe it.
describe a regenerative law firm? I'm really curious.
Okay. A regenerative law firm would know both its whole and the place where where it works. So a regenerative law firm might, for example, specialize in the law of a particular place. or it might specialize in the law of some particular aspect of global law that it knows all the way back to its origins. It knows the full story of that realm of law. It has people who are distinctively and uniquely drawn to work on that form of law, and their approach to it is unique. They do it in a way that nobody, the way they get into the courtroom, the way they do their legal briefs, the way that they engage and do their research expresses what's unique about the founders of that law firm, their connection to the origin of the particular law they're doing. And really a way to check it would be, are they creating something new? This is going to development. It's like, is this law firm, for example, who's the law firm that figured out the rights of nature and helped to enshrine the rights of nature in the Constitution of Ecuador? Whoever worked on that generated something new that had not existed before in the legal sphere and made a contribution that touched something beyond its clients. And this gets to be part of the key. I'm now into one of the fifth principles of regeneration, right? We're looking at the nestedness, how we exist in nested whole systems, and that what we generate, what we create, what offerings we do touches things explicitly beyond ourself and helps to change a larger system.
Okay, so I love this exercise now because you just basically described like a law firm that sounds super exciting to me. Not that I'm in the market for law services. I arbitrarily said law firm just because I tried to find something as far away from ag inherently as possible. But it's basically you're saying like it's just that sounds to me like the regenerative law firm you described, the fictitious regenerative law firm that you just described. It just sounds like the greatest law firm I've ever heard of. Like who wouldn't want
This
to
is
work with that?
This is the potential of regeneration, is we can take anything. Like I am part of a global community of praxis that has been working on and learning regeneration for me for a decade, some people for 30 years. Our teacher who just died last year, she was working on it for 50 years in her life, working in the biggest companies in the world, working on the
Carol
like
Sanford.
nations.
Carol
Yeah, that was
Sanford,
Carol
right?
Sanford.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, nation
amazing.
scale transformations, and you can apply it to governance. She helped me look at how am I applying it to parenting of my own kids and in my own community. You can look at it at the scale of economics and what does a regenerative economy look like. So basically any topic, any realm that you want to engage, these principles of regeneration can create new thinking and kind of like disruptive, surprising. Like if you had told me before this call, Mike, that you were going to get excited about a law firm, we would have been like, no, what are you talking about? We're not even going to talk about that. But anything we take on and sort of walk through the door, walk up these levels of regeneration. I could also tell you what a net positive law firm and a conservative law firm and an extractive law firm looks like also. And that's a useful way to distinguish between whatever it is you're working on.
And that's the power, I think, of the concept. And that's why I kind of started off trying to not dispel, but add more texture to the idea of regen ag. Regen ag is a part of a much bigger ideology than just no tillage. It's way
Yeah, and
more
I wouldn't say
complicated than that.
ideology. I would say ideology is like, I don't know. That's not quite it. I would say
How would you say
if
it?
you really want to get specific about it, um, generation is a linked set of ologies. It's a link of a cosmology, which is beliefs about how the world works. For example, I believe that each individual is unique, each place is unique. It has its own unique essence that can be expressed out into the world. Those are beliefs. That's not truth. That's just what I believe. So that's a cosmology. It also has a linked ontology, which is our belief about roles and specifically the role of humans that we have to play in the universe. It has a technology, which is a particular way of engaging, thinking, asking questions, reflecting, disrupting, inviting, personal growth and development. That's the technology that goes with the ontology, that goes with the cosmology, and ultimately sits within an epistemology, which is a broader set of thoughts about how do I know what I know? How do I change what I know? And if you link all those up, you get a very powerful instrument, and I'm specifically not saying tool, an instrument that can invite systemic change. And this is, I'll just say, this is like, I love being on here talking with you about this, both because I love your mind and love thinking with you, but also because this is some of my work in the world. This is what the Institute of Regeneration is working on. This is what Regen House is working on, is how do we invite this like large scale system change? I actually want to help change the trajectory of human history on the planet. And I think that regeneration is a way to do that.
How, what are the ways in which you've had success spreading these ideas and concepts to people? Like, how do we grow the population of people who can think this way?
You know, I'm not particularly concerned about scaling. You didn't say scaling, and I appreciate
I
that. You
never
said
said
growing.
scaling. I was
You
very
never said
careful to not
scaling.
say scaling.
Yeah, you did. I know.
Why
Like
is it important that
uh,
I didn't say scaling, though? Because
scaling
that's
is a
always the question
mechanical.
people say. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you scale this? How do you scale and automate and optimize, right? That's mechanical thinking, that's efficiency thinking, that's conservative, do less harm thinking. That's what it comes from. It comes from machines, comes from factory floors, it comes from the Industrial Revolution. That's where that thinking, that paradigm kind of emerged in human society. And so when we say, how do we scale this up? We're thinking like a machine. You also hear people say, like, well, we're just hardwired to do that. Humans actually don't have any wires, right? Until we get Neuralink going. But we don't have wires. We're a living system. We're not a machine. And so, like, I do want to invite the growth of this thinking, but I'm not focusing on how do I expand and scale. The way that I have found some success, whatever small success that I've had, is really by staying clear and full of integrity about what is regeneration and what's just sustainable or conservative dressed up as regeneration, and by inviting anyone who wants to engage to basically to come and play. So and that invitation is open to you or to anyone who's listening. Like, if you want regeneration, you have to have your own will to step towards it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're never going to do anything with it.
And again, that's another one of the characteristics I think really distinguishes it from the prevailing thoughts and approaches about agriculture and business is that you're right. Uh, business is very into how do we acquire more customers? How do we go deeper into the acquisition funnel? How do we almost like missionaries, like convert people, like literally
Yeah,
use the word conversion? How do we get for every
exactly.
100 people that land on our website, how do we convert 10% of them to do X, Y, or Z? Whereas what you're saying with regeneration is like, it's almost not a sales pitch. Like you kind of have to already be willing to want it first, and then you can kind
Yeah.
of like come and
It happens very
receive
quickly though. Like, you could
yeah,
have never heard of regeneration and be listening to this and be like, wow, what Mike's saying and either saying is really interesting. I'd like to dig further. It can happen quickly, but you're right that it's not um, evangelical. Like, it's not, you even see this with companies now. There's all these mission-based businesses, which is lovely and they're great. B Corps and all that. I love them. That's where I shop. They're great, but they're thinking from that level of like, do good, net positive. I have a mission. I'm going to convert. It's an ideology. I know what's good and right, and I'm going to tell all of you what's good and right, and I want to convert you so you come to my thing. Now, regeneration doesn't do that. We have a different paradigm, a different approach. It's the invitation is there.
all right, well, that's a good segue to our first guest who is about to come on. It might take a second to let her come on, but Karen Rodriguez, she's gonna jump in here in a second once we
That's a
get her
kind
camera
of
on.
perfect segue, actually.
Yeah, it was
Kind of
perfect.
amazing.
So I get okay, so yeah, that's I guess that's I don't know. I kind of hit this paradox of like, I guess why wouldn't people in the regenerative community want more people to adopt it?
It's not that I'm not close to more people jumping in, but I'm not pushing it. Right? It's like regenerate. In order to do regeneration, it takes um, whole being work. It's not
Mhm.
just like you can't go take a course and just like get the skills and check off the things and now I know it and I've got it. You have to actually regenerate your will and desire to think differently, to work differently. It's a little bit like doing Pilates. where like you go to Pilates session and then all of a sudden like you have a sore muscle and you're like, fuck, I didn't even know I had that muscle, right? Like regeneration and the thinking pushes on stuff that you know, mental models and ruts that we're in that we don't even know that we have. And so it takes will to kind of keep coming back and keep working on that. And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons I'm excited to talk with Karen today and Heather as well, because they have this deep commitment to their own ongoing growth, but that's also linked to making massive systems change and really moving things out there.
Our guest here right now is Karen Rodriguez. She's the CEO and founder of Kiss the Ground, which is the organization whose work inspired the film Kiss the Ground. And they have a mission to promote regeneration and healthy soil as a solution to all things wellness, water, climate crisis, all of that stuff. You know, her work is really driven by deep passion for kind of education and understanding the connection between food systems and ecological health. And it's a real honor to have Karen on the show. Hello, Karen. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, Ethan and I had some really fun conversations and thought experiments about what regeneration is. I want to hear from you, though. You know, regenerative. One of the things about regenerative agriculture is that it really emphasizes indigenous knowledge. And you know, in your words, how would you describe what regen ag is, and how do indigenous principles sort of contribute to its core principles?
Yeah, and think you know, it's such everyone wants to have an answer that's just succinct and like, this is it, this is what it is, right? But I think like anything in life, it contains multitudes
Mm-hmm.
of things and thinking. And I think that the basics for me is regeneration is an energetic force, and it's so much bigger than us, and it's beyond us, and it's always happening with or without our support or stewardship. I believe that indigenous cultures and the way I learned about my past and about the past of people. I'm a Mayan woman from Guatemala, and then I have a lot of friends from Mexico because I grew up in LA. And just listening to their grandmothers and how their great grandmothers did things is that they were tapped into that energy and were a supportive stewardship role in that. That there was always there was always a piece of nature, a plant, a food, a connectivity thread that was always solving for health. So be it a scrape, or be it a cut, or be it a you know, something going on in your stomach, like there was just always a connector to nature that was of a regenerative energy, that it was like, if you steward or connect with this, then you'll get this effect from that. And so therefore it is a yeah, it's a caring energy, and it's a reproductive energy, and um it's a it's a fertile energy. It's a space to recreate energy. So it's a big force. When I learned about it, when we started the organization, and I learned about it in this now today way, it was about restoring the health that was once there, that would allow us to be here as a species, allow us to eat healthy food, have our water systems restored. And that I knew that its root was indigenous, because I knew of this energy and I knew of the past of how it worked. On a very large scale. Like, they didn't make gardens, they made food forests. You know, people, humans, used their energy and connection with nature in order to create abundance and availability and health on a massive scale, without calling it all those labels. Now, we were in 2013, I was in my late 20s, and realized that while I was connected to food and connected to nature and connected to something, I wasn't fully connected in the systems and functions that we have as a society and as people. I was living in Venice Beach, which was awesome. It was in its second gentrification at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned a lot and met a lot of people, got together with people. And what it came down to was, can we participate and be a keystone species now at this time? And how do we do that with indigenous wisdom at the root and newer science or newer analytics available to us, and with AI coming and all the things that we knew technology was going to do? Can we put this together and remind people to connect to that force and energy? So regenerative agriculture, and now if you pare that down, then we're talking about farming in a way
Mm-hmm.
that connects to all of that.
That's great. Okay, see, just because you mentioned AI, I think we were going to jump there anyway. Let's jump there right now. What does AI have to do with regeneration? I'm asking that semi pretending to be naive about it, but also kind of naive about it. Like and Ethan, I want you to chime in too with Karen afterwards. What does AI have to do with regeneration and how can it help regeneration?
I'm going to answer it from a pretty far out lens, not a very technical lens. We've
Okay.
changed. Humans have changed a lot. And only in the 10 years I've been doing this or messing around in this space, we don't listen the same way. We don't communicate the same way. We don't talk the same way. We don't do things the same way. There's a lot of opposing forces that are like, okay, convenience has gotten us to a certain place in how we do things and how we use our world, our living world. In trying to find that convenience, technology can be a supportive factor in that. How exactly, and to call something and say this is a healthy way to use this, that's up for debate. But I think in terms of the way that I see it, if you're just asking me like the question like straight up, I would say metrics, tracking. We need to understand that we're, if soil is treated the way it's designed, it's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, how much is it pulling? And then, all right, it builds water holding capacity. Okay, how much water is being held? And all of that will matter for the health of the earth, and it will matter for if you have a business that you're handling. So I think there's something there, but I haven't been tapped into that deeply. So I think
Well,
Ethan might be able to share a little bit more insight
well,
than
maybe
me on
let
that.
me try something out on you guys because it seems like one of the tenets of thinking regeneratively is that, as opposed to extractively, is just taking into account a lot more variables and acknowledging how they're all connected, right? Like that's probably a key differentiator is just understanding the chain of effect. If I do this, I'm not just looking one step beyond. I'm looking at 3, 4, 5 steps beyond and how it like does things, affects things around me. Something like an AI on a general level is really good at helping people manage complexity. Like, so I don't know. Do you think if there's
Mike, I
something
would
there?
I would I would add to that in that context is one of the main principles of regenerative agriculture. It's
Uh-huh.
why it's hard to get a definition, or call it a math equation, that you
Mm-hmm.
just copy this math equation, replicate,
Mm-hmm.
replicate, replicate. That's what we like to do because we like to build that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with AI, the context is always going to be with like whoever's feeding the AI, or whoever's working with it. So I think there is a positive in that, that context won't be taken out of the equation, and so then that can make many results versus one result that works.
Right.
I would
I
I would
love
say
that.
I would differentiate a little on what you were saying. I agree with everything Karen just said, as usual. But I would differentiate a little, Mike. I actually, what you said about like a core of regeneration is thinking and seeing all the variables and the cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually not how regeneration generally tends to approach. That's a great thing. That's like a systems thinking approach. Usually from that, we get to that in that like do good, net positive. We try to map out all the cause and effects. You get all these maps and diagrams and arrows pointing all this way and the other. Regeneration
Mm-hmm.
takes a different approach and seeks to look at the whole system as it is alive and look at the uniqueness and the potential of that system and move in that direction. Regeneration does not work on solving problems. It works on potential. So I think AI can help. I don't necessarily think simplifying complexity is what we want to use artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, to do. I think it can help us see and understand and get to know and learn complex environments in a good way. But as Karen alluded to, one of the issues is the effectiveness of a artificial intelligence, of a generative AI, has a lot to do with what it was fed, what it ate growing up, right? What it was trained on. And if we're training generative AI on the corpus of what white guys wrote on the internet, which is most of what a lot of AI is trained on,
which
then
is
we're going to
most
get
of what generative AI is. Yeah.
right, it's going to get a little bit biased in what it's putting out. So I think one of the keys for, like, I'm very pro AI. I think there's a huge opportunity to work with and help AI evolve in a way that it could lead to large scale, life shed scale, landscape scale, human culture scale regeneration in so many different ways, from psychotherapy and coaching from a regenerative lens would be amazing and really good for a lot of the world, to like custom designing unique plant agroecological species assemblies unique to the soil type and the place that could create a diversified income for the right, mix of people who are living in that place. But if it's going to do all that, we have to update the foundational models with more complex ecological inputs. If you want to regenerate whole living systems, the models have to learn from whole living systems, not from what I wrote on the internet 15 years ago.
Karen, we had a fun thought experiment before you came on where I challenged Ethan to think about how you would design a regenerative law firm. And I said law firm specifically because I wanted to choose something that was as far away from maybe nature and food as possible. And he kind of nailed it, I think. So that was pretty good. But like, speaking of organizations, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work with Kiss the Ground and how does that organization work and how do you interact with all the systems around you to kind of generate change and regenerate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kept our core, which was always storytelling. We knew that if we were so connected to food at the time we started the organization, but so disconnected at the same time, we were like, if we didn't know all of this, then a lot of people don't know all of this. So we stuck to storytelling and continuing to tell the story of soil and the possibilities that exist if soil is healthy from lots of different lenses. So lots of different points of view, some educational, some entertaining, all to continue to grow the audience. We stuck to Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point as a reference of where we were going. Is if we get, and it's debatable, but they say between 13% and 23% would be tipping point of a story. And so what would happen would be a cascading effect where it then becomes the norm. So we stuck to that. I think we knew that besides awareness, education came next. And it was like, who needs to learn about this? And is it business owners? Is it, people who need to learn how to shop? Is it politicians, come to connect them with farmers on a farm and have them learn, or businesses as they're growing and coming into this fold, like what do they need to know and what do they need to think about and how do they need to think about it? And so education was our next pillar. And then that turned into partnerships because there was always a connector piece in our work where we would meet people and we'd go, okay, you're doing this and you're doing this. Well, why don't you two get together and do this? And I think there's been a lot of that in this movement. There's been not as much collaboration as you would hope, because there's a lot of us and there's a lot of world and there's a lot of life, and there's not as much collaboration, but there's been a lot of respect and collaboration in the sense of building this movement together, because there were a few of us when it started, and I think we each cared to give each other the microphone and say, you do this part really well, so do this, and then support each other on the back end when people don't know. We're having conversations together without having them publicly together, and then helping each other in each other's organizations. So that there's been a lot of that in this movement. And I think that that's been brilliant, because that way Kiss the Ground went from sort of having lots of tentacles because we were doing things that didn't exist, and now they exist, so we can focus in more on just continuing on awareness. We've learned a lot in the it's only been 10, 11 years we've been around. I mean, I could say 14 because the truth is it's been 14, but the paperwork and all of that makes it a little bit less.
Always the paperwork.
But we've learned so much. There's so many ways to look at this. If you look at it on a local level, which is how we were looking at it when we started, you see and have eyes to certain contexts. Then you go nationwide and you see a whole other layer of many things that have to regenerate in order for regeneration to really happen. You go global, because we put out 3 documentaries, and those are coming on Amazon on Earth Month this year, 2 of them, and then the 3rd will come out later. But once you go global and you really look at the globe, you're like, oh wait, there's so many layers that have to come together for this to work. And it's a brilliant thing, because you have to work in the micro as much as the macro, and that is a consistent thing. I think that I've tried to learn myself. As much as it's important to do everything to get a documentary out, it's also important that I ate what I needed to eat that day for my gut biome, which is my own soil biome in my gut. So that learning, I think, has been the capacity building and the stretch that I realized that, that's the hurdle, is that we all need to, if we're going to participate in regeneration, that it's a broad spectrum, and that we participate in all parts of it as much as we can.
So I love, and you alluded to earlier about kind of, the reluctance to put a definition, and kind of the acknowledgement that, like, most of the world, a lot of the world works on this kind of copy paste idea of like, oh, I figured out a thing that seems to work. Why don't you copy paste it here, 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 and here, and then you're all going to have this thing to kind of work. Storytelling is obviously, a huge part of the soul of what you guys do. How do you know when it kind of, that mentality clicks from that copy paste mentality to the more authentic regenerative quality when you're telling a story to people? Like, what kind of gets them over that hump?
I would say that it's different for different people, and that's why we created various types of media. We didn't just stick to only documentaries. I think that, it is always, we stuck to encouragement, empowerment, and inspiration more than, we could talk about all the bad things, but we didn't choose to do that, because we believe that empowerment, uniqueness, and that everyone can participate in their own way is very true and very real. That's the most authentic thing. And so therefore, when you see results from that, as I can speak from my point of view internally in the org, and I answered the info ad email for years. So I didn't actually stop doing that till probably a year ago.
Wow.
But basically what happens is you start to see what touches people, but it's very different for different groups. Different groups are looking for different things. You can get a letter from a teacher who's teaching kindergartners who's like, I got a letter the other day, actually. The teacher had the children build a farming tractor with things that they had around their classroom that was a no-till drill. And it was just, of everything we talk about and teach about, that's what motivated her. And then she sent me the video of the kids, and the kids were having a complete blast. Now, which one of those kids walks out of there and wants to learn more? I don't know, but I make stuff so that happens, And then same with, I spend time in Guatemala sometimes, and I met a man here who has an insane story about what he's done in the world, but basically he left everything to come do regenerative agriculture here in Guatemala. He bought a piece of land at a volcano, is committed to regenerating all the avocado farms around him and teaching people. And then he literally said to me, I had coffee with him the other day, and he was like, my legacy will be to regenerate Guatemala. And I'm like, we were a group of
Yeah.
kids who were just like, we need to tell this story, and we just need to keep telling it. And so I think it varies why somebody's moved. And I don't think that we have a formula to say, this is for sure going to move everyone, but we can say this piece of media might move some people and create that awareness. And you do, luckily we have a nice community that gives us a lot of feedback, so people will, we put out a resource the other day, and 3 people emailed me and were like, I love this. And I was like, you can call me. I know you. Like, you don't need to email me. But
Yeah.
it's so funny because people care. I do believe people care. I think people feel disempowered and sometimes hands tied. Sometimes they don't know how to function in a world that has systems that function a certain way, capitalist system, to societal systems, and then go, how do I mesh that with, let me go play in the mud right now, in the middle of the day, I have all these meetings, like, when can I fit going to plant something? And so there's a dichotomy that feels counter, but it isn't counter. You actually can integrate it. It's just that people feel disempowered. And so I think that when we do our work, what we have in mind is, is it empowering? And is it giving the farmer a microphone? Because that's really a lot of what we do, is give the microphone to the farmer. And then allowing people to be on a journey, because it's not cut and dry. Once you regenerate, you're going to regenerate again if you're really in regenerative energy. So there isn't an end to what you're doing, and therefore it's a journey. And so allowing people to be where they are and continue to teach and continue to conversate and continue to evolve the thing is it's important. There isn't an end to, you just get somewhere and now everything's regenerative. It's a continuum. So
I just caught myself, based on Ethan's been schooling me for the past hour and a half, and I just realized that I asked you a question about regeneration in a very non-regenerative way. I ironically asked you about, how do we get away? What's the copy-paste solution for getting people away from the copy-paste solution?
it's awesome.
Fail.
That's so awesome.
Fail. You're
That's
fired.
so cool.
There
You're
you
fired
go.
from this
That's
podcast.
basically, but I realized that right as you said the first thing, it's like, you said, it depends, right? And I think that goes the same for farming. Like, oh, how do you increase carbon in your soil? Well, it depends. You can't just do one size fits all. I love it. This is,
And I think we're uncomfortable sometimes in the unknown. We're actually, that's not a good statement. We are often uncomfortable in the unknown, and that is real. And I think the more that we can understand, I don't have it that my indigenous grandma would see, a fungus in her plant and just know what she was going to go grab to fix it. I have it that she would pay attention and start to look at what's going on and why, and then try things,
yeah.
So that's a very different approach than going, oh, let me go grab this spray. Let me go grab this one spray. It'll do it. It'll do the thing.
Karen, we have a few more minutes with you, but I want to ask you 2 questions that I like to ask people that come on the show. One of them is that if you're looking at the world and you want to kind of make it a more regenerative place, and let's say you had a magic wand, where would you wave that wand at, and what would you want that wand to do to help create a more regenerative planet?
I'm going to just say the caveat that this answer, if you asked me it in a few days, it might be different, because I just I'm always looking at what are the points to press. I don't think I have the answer yet, but what sticks out to me a lot is I would wave my wand at humans to remember that there's a universe completely in their body, and that if they can put attention on regenerating that universe, that what they will find is that they're fed a lot of information that they can hear, that is given to us, and that we can use that then to regenerate anything we're around or care for. I just have it we don't do that a lot. A lot of us are on these phones a lot. I don't know if I think there's people who I could speak. Yeah, there's a couple of people in my life who I know don't know how to be quiet anymore and be in quiet anymore. And I think that that's problematic. I think that we've had a lot of information given to us as humans when we are in that silence. And so, yeah, I feel like everyone's just screaming at each other all the time now.
Wow.
So
Well said. How do we build that wand? My gosh, I want to hand you that wand like yesterday. And so the second question, sort of related, is let's see the crystal ball. It can tell you anything about 10 years from now in the world. What would you ask the crystal ball? Not what kind of answer do you want, but what would you ask the crystal ball?
did we choose to revere life? That's it.
Did we choose to revere life? Do you think we're not?
I think that we are playing at life, and I think we're trying at life, and I think we're surviving life. I don't know that we are revering life. I don't know that we are really respectful and mindful of the miracle that it is to be standing here and to be able to think and have thoughts and ideas and share them and play together and eat together and like have you ever stared at a watermelon radish? It's like the most insane, it's like the most insane vegetable, and I'm floored by that vegetable. And I think that we don't live that way. I think we play at something. I don't think we.
Yeah. I mean, I have stared at a watermelon radish, by the way, and it is like, how the heck did this thing get like? Well, I catch myself sometimes because, like, for a while, my inclination when I saw stuff like that was like, oh, that looks like it was grown in a lab, which is so weird to think because, I mean, it was grown by nature, which is a lab of a sort, but like the implication of grown in a lab, the implication when people I think say like, oh, that thing looks like it was grown in a lab is that you're almost implying that nature could never create something as beautiful as something like you're staring at, and you'd have to actually have a process and a science to create it, which I think is totally wrong. But these are the words that people kind of say, right? So okay, all right, before we go, Ethan, any last words for Karen or questions?
I mean, you've chosen storytelling as your like acupuncture point, as the node that you're aiming for. Should we keep going on that? Are there other nodes we should pay attention to?
Oh,
Other
there's
places we should
definitely
drop
other nodes.
needles?
There's definitely other nodes.
What's like one or two that you're seeing that I don't know that I could help with, or that Mike could help with, or that like we need ally and crew to go be like, all right, I'm gonna work on that little node.
I think I want to answer this question from the context of I am Kiss the Ground is we still work within systems and structures, right? It's not like we have this from the beginning, we were working within the community we were in, we were working within the context we were in. In the context that we are in, storytelling is still important because narrative and conversation are still very much prevalent in how we function. I would say that second to that is brands coming into the fold have a very large impact. They have an impact in everything they do, from sourcing of their product to getting the product out, what they teach about the product, and then the health and benefits of the product. I think to me, that is the next area of focus where it's like, how do we have these conversations, meet the brands where they are, talk about transparency and humility and say, all right, we're on a journey together. What do you need from us? How can we support you? And then whenever they have questions or hit rough moments, really have deep conversation and say, is this the right move? And, is it regenerative? Is it coming from this place? And I think that within the context that I'm in, storytelling, partnerships, I would say there's a long way to go there. It isn't something we can put down yet. I think it's something that I might be working on for the rest of my life. I don't see it as yeah, you can put them down yet and they're gonna work on their own. I don't see that yet. So
It's
I
to
would
go.
say, within the context I'm in and within the context our nonprofit is in, those are the points. Now, if you're talking to me as a human being just on my own, it is talk to your people, be friends with your friends. Really be friends with your friends. Not let's see what we're going to get out of this or what we can build together, but let's be friends. Let's cook a dinner together again. Let's talk about, let's think together. Let's think in 100-year plans. Let's not think in 5-year plans.
Yeah.
Let's think about
Yeah.
what are we doing in this generation on our own to make new systems that we don't have to fit in, and maybe we won't live in them, but somebody will. And so let's make a meal together and let's talk about it and let's think together. And even if we don't walk away having all the answers today, let's continue this. One of my favorite definitions of friendship is one long conversation, and I'm in a few of those, and I love them, and they make me better, and they make me revere life. So
Let's form a club. That's the 100-year plan or the 200-year plan club, and anyone can join. Fully open. In order to
amazing.
join, you have to cook a dinner with friends and work on your 100-year plans for the planet, for life,
And
for the universe.
contributing to life. Yeah.
I
Amazing.
would argue if you just kept doing that for 100 years, a 100-year plan would come out of that, right?
Yeah.
And that, hey, I mean, look, I love what you said there, because I think, like, if you're working on something as ambitious that you recognize it might not come to fruition in your own career or lifetime, it's probably something worth working on. So
I think so. I don't
that's
think I got into this. I mean, maybe when we started, it was like, we have 3 years to live. And like, there was a weird urgency, but I learned quickly that that's not real. Yeah, I don't think I work on anything that isn't hopefully going to withstand more time and be here past me.
well said. Karen, your work will live on well beyond you and your legacy. We're all big fans of the work. I rewatched Kiss the Ground this week just to kind of get in the right
Awesome.
mindset. It's been a few years, and what a powerful piece of film that is. So thank you for advancing the message and being
Thank you.
you. But thank you
Thank
for
you for
coming on.
having me. Thank you.
All right, we are back here with our next guest here, Heather Terry. She's the founder and CEO of GoodSAM, which is a certified B Corp. They're committed to creating food that's good for consumers, farmers, and the planet through regenerative agriculture and fair trade practices. Heather, welcome on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. Kind of, what's GoodSAM all about, and kind of what precipitated you to found it and shape it the way you did?
Well, I've been in the consumer goods space for 16 years, really creating pretty traditional food and beauty companies. Sold my first company in 2015 to private equity and was consulting for a number of years, primarily helping women raise capital, because that's really hard for female entrepreneurs. If you look at those statistics, they're pretty grim. So it was helping female founders really put their financial house in order, their assortment. I've worked with every retailer in the country, from the mom and pop shops in New York City all the way through the likes of Whole Foods, Sprouts, Costco, Target, Walmart. I've placed over 300 products on store shelves. So you've probably picked up something that I've put on the shelf in my career. And now almost 6 years ago, I was looking at a project that was direct with farmers in Colombia, and I had never worked in Colombia. I had done some farm work on the ground through other companies, there was this opportunity. I wasn't sure how serious it was, so I went down there, and then I realized how serious it could be. I was in the countryside, very, very remote area, talking directly to indigenous leaders and associations, and they were saying, look, the war ended here in 2017. We need somebody to take the products that we're bringing to market, and how the heck do we do that? Because these brokers that are coming through the system are killing us. There's no upside for us. The economics of our communities is dwindling. We don't know how to access bigger markets like the US. And that was really where the idea for GoodSAM was born. We decided that what we were going to attempt to do was work directly with farmers and in these regenerative remote systems. So the roots of the company were really around protecting, preserving, and evolving these regenerative systems. Now we're working with some systems that have the will to move into regeneration. But in the beginning, it was really about finding them, really nourishing them, giving them a guaranteed off-taker, and then bringing them to the market. A lot of that started to evolve even further when Whole Foods came on board and said, hey, we're going to take these lines nationally with you guys. That gave us the opportunity to work with some less evolved supply networks that really wanted to move toward regeneration, but maybe have a longer on-ramp for it. So GoodSAM now works in 9 different countries in 4 different verticals. So coffee, chocolate, nuts, and fruits. Everything has some synergy, some sort of regenerative component to it, where crops are growing together and we're off taking more than just one thing from the farmers. We are paying those farmers fairly and growing the economics on the ground, and then bringing those products to the market so that consumers can understand the full extent of the supply network, but also get that high quality product at a great price. So that's really what we're focused on in our ecosystem, in our corner of the world.
So you're obviously not new to this game. Like you said, you've 300 products that we've all probably have in our homes right now that you've placed in the past. Like, how has it been different building a company working with regenerative suppliers versus not? Like, what are the kind of nuances and differences in that you didn't have to face before, maybe?
Yeah, Mike, it's way more complex, which is why a lot of companies aren't doing it. It's why also it's more difficult for the multinationals to get involved, because these are really complex systems in the ground. Not only are you off taking, right? In GoodSAM's case, we don't just off take. We actually, sort of similar to this podcast, sit around the table and say, okay, well, if we're off taking, what can we do to increase the off take? What can we do to protect the ecosystem? What can we do to protect the economics, grow the economics of this community, and see better outcomes across the board? That requires a lot more deeper thinking than the paradigm of the fooding system that we exist in today, that is really just about extraction. Take everything that you can at the cheapest price and get the cheapest product on shelf with the highest return to the company, the corporate, the people sitting in the C-suite, sitting around in a boardroom. What we're really looking to do is change the paradigm and say, we can prioritize planet, we can prioritize people. There's enough to go around. Everyone can be successful in this model. That just requires a lot more manpower and woman power, right? People power, to think and to also reorganize ourselves around what success looks like. The success for our board, I just had a board meeting a couple months ago. We have a new board from after our Series A financing. And I level set the board by saying, well, what is success for us? What does success mean to this group and our internal group and our farmers on the ground? And how can we align ourselves around an idea of success that we can all participate in and all feel good about? Where, because in the old paradigm, it's always one person winning and others losing, right? Or one person clawing more into their part of the ecosystem and leaving somebody else with just enough to survive. How would it look if everyone were doing more than surviving, if everyone were thriving on some level? And what does that really mean? What is enough for a CPG company to take in? What is enough for a C-suite employee to make, an executive to make? What is enough of a return to an investment partner, right? Versus, just saying like, we're gonna get the biggest number we possibly can. that changes things. That also attracts different people to the business, different types of employees, different types of investors, different types of retailers, right? It's a different way of looking at running a business.
Yeah, so up front, I spent quite a bit of time with Ethan talking about how the idea of regeneration, while many people in the food industry probably typically hear it in the context of regen ag, that's the thing, is regeneration can apply to anything. And you've kind of been hinting about how you're doing things differently, not just on the farms and in the products, but in your business and your board. What do you define as a regenerative business model?
That's a great question. And thank you for being the only person who's ever asked it of me, because it's something I talk about a lot, but not a lot of people talk about. Look, yeah, I think the food industry in and of itself is stuck in an idea that regeneration only applies to a farm. It only applies to a crop, right? But there is a new crop of businesses that are thinking about regeneration in a way that extends beyond the farm. And in fact, we believe that it has to extend beyond the farm for regenerative ag and regenerative farming to be successful at all, right? Because regenerative ag and regenerative farming in and of themselves are a very long distance profitability model. It takes a long time to make a regenerative system work and to make it work in a way that makes money or that is profitable, right? There are challenges there, which means that internally, as we look at the rest of the food system that participates in getting products on the shelves, something has to be done differently. I just had a meeting recently with the CEO of a very prominent retailer in the United States who will remain unnamed here for now, who said to me, "What can we do to help you? What is the challenge?" And I said, well, as far as regenerative is concerned, farmers and companies, the companies that make the products, are the only two components of the network that are participating financially. So if you want regeneration on your store shelf, you're going to have to start ponying up financially, whether that be reduced margin. That means funneling money through the system in a greater capacity than you're already doing. But something here needs to happen in terms of full participation, in terms of changing the way that we work on the board level and on the governance level of all the participants in the food system. So it's about reconfiguring your organization to think deeper. For us, it's about continuously challenging the status quo. I love when people come to me and say, "You can't do that." I'm like, "Watch me do that," or "Watch me change something about it." If I can't change the whole thing, Ethan knows this. If I can't change the whole thing, I am likely asking them to change something about it that gets us a step closer to the ultimate outcome that I'd like to see for the industry. It doesn't mean I get everything that I want, but it does usually mean that I can make somebody move a little bit in the system to get us to a different outcome or closer to a different outcome. So it really needs to be about active listening, constant challenging, constant questioning, right? Why are we doing it this way? Who said it has to be done this way? Who said if this doesn't make sense from a reciprocal regenerative place, why are we doing it? And why aren't we asking for it to change? Why don't we start to challenge that part of it? Right? I think oftentimes young food companies in particular, or even old food companies, get stuck in this idea, in the paradigm of, well, that's just the way it is. I don't accept that. I don't accept that that's just the way it is. To me, the whole idea of regeneration and bringing this movement to the forefront is about disruption. You can't just slap a label on it. You got to actually do the work behind the scenes. This is the super, super, super important part about regenerative and regenerative business models and regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, and I spent some time earlier with Ethan kind of dispelling some of the common myths that I hear frequently about it. And I think that's why I think some people wrestle with kind of regenerative agriculture, is because they're trying to almost wedge a regenerative ag program into a business that's degenerative.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, can you do that?
It's really hard. I mean, we're seeing it on the multinational level, right? I applaud them for the things they are trying. We need them. We need them to try. We need them to change some things. It's going to be slow and painful for them. But they've got to start asking different questions internally. I know people like Ethan are in there trying to shake them up a little bit and ask them different disruptive questions, it can be really, really hard. And Ethan, you know how much respect I
Well,
have for you. You're going to have that conversation in the first place. It's very, very challenging.
and it's
Um,
also when you do bring all the stakeholders, if you really look at the word stakeholder and the truth of what that is, sometimes people forget that, like, the farm is a stakeholder, the soil
totally,
is a stakeholder, like, and if
totally.
you don't include that in the conversation and then really go, what do each of you need in order for this to work, and how do we create that? It's not a lot of people start from there. They start from, the company needs to make money. That's the starting point. And then from there, everything gets built around that, as opposed to going, all right, who are really are all the stakeholders, and what does each one need?
Well, and that is really the disconnect that we have in our culture. We're so disconnected from nature. Like, forget regenerative, right? Forget all the complexities around that. We are so disconnected from nature, even just putting our feet on the ground and looking up at the sky and breathing air and considering our immediate circumstances around us, right? The majority of consumers don't know we're 95% of the things that end up in their pantry or their refrigerator came from.
Mhm.
Executives don't think, oh, hey, in order to make this bag of potato chips, like, that came from a farm in Tanzania. They don't think that far. They just like, oh, potatoes showed up and it happened. Right. So that right there, Mike, right? There is a lot of work to be done. And I know, people like Ethan and HowGood and Kiss the Ground and lots of different organizations are just trying to get people to think about, hey, the potato came from over there, right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
first step. And then you start thinking about the regenerative certifications and all this that consumers can't even begin to wrap their brain. We have a lot of work to do, but I am really encouraged by the fact that small and mid-sized organizations and a few really, really smart people and some of the multinationals are getting influenced by people like Ethan, who are saying, hey, we've got to change something here. We got to change it fast.
Mhm.
And I'm going to make every incremental gain a huge win that, to inspire others within these organizations to start moving in the right direction. It's a multi-pronged approach, and very regenerative and reciprocal, even in the nature
Yeah.
of how we're doing it.
I want to touch on a little bit of how you approach innovation and deciding what product categories to put out there, because I cut my teeth in, I used to be at Chobani doing innovation and new
Mm,
product development, and I sort of have this thesis that I formed of, not necessarily about Chobani, but big food in large. Somebody buys a research report and they decide that something is about to be a trending thing. And then they kind of like call up the procurement people and they make the supply chain bend to the will of whatever that trend is that they think. And, that's kind of how we get these fantastically successful foods that kind of don't really have much redeemable, valuable value for nature, because they're kind of just forcing monocultures on them. But like, maybe, contrast that with like how did you decide to get into the products that you're in right now, and do regenerative principles kind of go into affecting how you decide what to do next, or what your product assortment can
yeah.
be?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hate trends. I'll say that here. I
Yep.
hate trends. I
Same.
think trends are stupid.
Yep.
And I think they're stupid because they eventually always fizzle out. Like, when something is a trend product, inevitably it blows itself up because some study comes out or something comes out or people are just tired of it, or somebody, the next trend comes along. I'm in the business of real food, right? I'm in the business of real food. I'm in the business of, like, non-ultra processed foods, like the non-UPF conversation. I don't see regenerative as a trend. I see regenerative and regenerative business as a necessity. There needs to be an evolution to how we do this. The extractive nature of the systems that we have built are destroying everything. And if we're not careful, I've said this for a long time about the multinationals. By the time we get to 2035, 2040, they are going to be freaking out if they don't do something now, because the extractive nature of those supplies will backfire on them. And that's
Hmm.
why a lot of them are listening right now going, well, how do we do this? What do we need to do? As difficult and as painful and as sometimes as unsuccessful as their efforts are, they are trying something. So again, should be applauded. But from the small companies that are creating real food, right? When we were raising capital, a lot of the investors said to me, they're like, but you're in the business of commodities, Heather. Like, how are you going to grow commodity? I'm like, how are we not going to grow commodity? People depend on real food for sustenance, and we are a global fooding system, right? We're going to come back to basics. People are going to get simpler. It's going to come down to that, but it's also going to come down to how we're doing it and how we're able to get that product to customers. That's our innovation. That's our main focus, not trends, not I could give a shit about trend reports, Mike. Like I said, I just think they're terrible. I'm like, when investors or people in the ecosystem, we've kind of weeded them out over the last couple of years because we've just realized like those are not the people that should be sitting at the table at GoodSAM. We're here about real, honest, game-changing, planet-changing, life-changing, economic-changing food. That's what we're about, right? And there's nothing trendy about that. That's about longevity. That's about the future. That's about something that outlasts everyone who's involved here in this particular company for the long term and potentially inspires others to do the same.
I love what you amen to that. I am like frequently on like panels or like talks as the future of food guy. So a lot of people ask me, what's the future of food?
Yeah.
What's the next trending thing? And I always say the next trending thing is the end of food trends.
I'm going to steal that answer from you,
Because
Mike.
they're not doing anyone a disservice. And even if you take the hyper-capitalist point of view of saying like, I want to know what's trending next so I can capitalize from it. If you're only looking at trends that you can see, you're already late.
Exactly.
It's not even a good way to do trends. If you're going to be like, the best way to do a trend is to start one that wasn't.
And to say, what is the weirdest thing that I can find that I think people will latch themselves to eventually? That's really actually, if you're an investor, where you need to be operating from.
Yeah. So Heather, I want to hear your thoughts on this, but also for Karen and Ethan, maybe after, is like, what advice might you give to somebody who's maybe working at a food business, that the roots of that food business, the stuff that keeps the lights on at that business are very much tied to like a degenerative system, but they want to introduce more regeneration in there. Like I've been that person before in those organizations. Like what advice would you give that person to kind of fight the good fight and make progress? Like,
yeah. So it's the bridge between the old paradigm and the new paradigm for me. And what that is money. If you can make a financial case to make something less extractive, to make something regenerative, you've won the argument in the old paradigm. And you have suddenly created a shift to something new based on something they already understand. And that is still important, right? So we have to work within the construct of the paradigm that exists and the paradigm that we want to see. And the link for me between that, again, is money. Because money, for better or worse, right now is still valued. It's still something we all as a society globally agree is something that we all need in order to make change, in order to do business, in order to survive. We've all made that agreement. I don't think any of us here is going to change that overnight. So we have to use it to our advantage in order to create change.
Yeah. Like AI is a tool or an instrument, and like the use of it is, the AI itself isn't good or bad, or it's not anything. It's whose hands is it in, and with what paradigm are we thinking in order to generate something from it. Money is the same. And in this case, Heather's just painted money as a bridge. I think HowGood works to do something similar. And fortunately, we actually have the wind of consumer desire at our backs in this case, because sustainable products actually sell more. You can look at the NYU data on this. You can look at the McKinsey data on this. The more sustainable products, the ones that are further on the pathway towards regeneration, are selling more because of the desire of consumers to have food that is healthy for themselves and the planet. And as I mentioned before, the generations coming up, the millennials, the Gen Z, especially Gen A, like we're seeing this drive. They will respond if there's good communication, if there's good story storytelling to bring in care inside of it. If it's a incredible and delicious product, you have to make sure that happens. They will respond with purchasing power. The growth of Heather's business and Heather's team just had a really exciting announcement of their Series A raise to continue growing. And you don't raise money if you don't have something good going. And so, HowGood seeks to do this systemically to help showcase which are, that we've analyzed 4 million products in the global food system, and some of them are significantly further along the path. We help those companies, whether they're an awesome tiny company like GoodSAM or like Simple Mills or like some of our other, regenerative first companies, or if they're a massive company like Danone or like Nestle, but they have done some work, they have some regenerative agriculture happening in their supply systems, then telling that story and communicating that in a simple, clear, understandable, comparative way to retailers in order to communicate to consumers, that can move things significantly. When it's visible, then we have definitively shown over and over again around the world, whether it's Dubai or the UK or in the North American market, those products that have gone further on the journey towards regeneration, they sell better. People want them. And so that's helping make the bridge as well, when you can actually see the real hard impact data that underlies it and make a decision based on it.
And it's been inspiring. I definitely, when I started this work, it was very scary talking to the very big brands, for sure. In my mind, it was like, they're terrible, they're just going to be degenerative. But over time, you continue the conversation and you realize, like, oh, younger people get hired and they really care about this, actually. And so I've seen companies where it's been a younger staff member really talking to the CEO over and over and over and over till the CEO cares, or CEOs that are also like, I want to innovate. I'm over this. Let's do something new. And so they look to their staff to speak up, and then they get to this point. And so that's been really amazing because, yeah, I would say honestly, with all my heart, when we started, it was just like, oh, I don't want to talk to the big ones. Like, they're just going to talk about an old paradigm. And that's not true. So it does exist. And then I would say also just the empowerment of using your voice in a respectful way, obviously. And then if your CEO is not listening to you, go to your sustainability person, head of sustainability, and get with them and say, let's show our staff this movie. Let's take our staff to a farm. Let's do a volunteer day. And really just get them to also embody it in their cells, so that they start to understand it versus just, being the person that's always questioning.
Yeah,
You
get
know,
them to feel it. Have them feel it
get
in
them
their
to feel it.
bones. Get out of the academic part of it, of like thinking of it as a theory, but like feeling it. And Heather, I love what you said about the money is the bridge, because there's a quote that I love that I think Henry Ford said it, but I like to believe he said it. But there's a reason why we rate cars in horsepower.
Yeah.
Is because that's a new paradigm coming in, and you have to explain the new paradigm in the context of the old paradigm. Because if you told people this is a car, goes fast, they're like, "What's a car?" And I think that's like also regeneration. I think regeneration creates a lot of value that isn't conveniently captured in the old school capitalist accounting system. Like equity for people isn't like a line item on a balance sheet today,
Right.
Should be, but it's not, right? So we got to find a way around that.
Well, we pitched a while ago now. Few have taken it on, but we pitched a more complex multi-capital form of accounting that identified 8 forms of capital. And you can still check this out in our little book. It's called Regenerative Enterprise. It was published actually in 2013. I can't believe that. We re-released it 2 years ago. And it's available. You can go download it and pay nothing if that works, or you can pay us $25. Somebody actually paid us $1,000 for the book once, way back in the beginning. So it's pay what you want. But it lays out these 8 different forms of capital, some of which we've talked about today: financial capital, social capital, we know, but then there's also living capital and intellectual capital and even cultural and spiritual capital. And there is a way that we can account for these, and by looking at all of them, get the more holistic picture of what can be generated by the types of regenerative business models that Heather's talking about, and stories told by what Kiss the Ground and Karen's group is doing. So that multi-capital approach and seeing is very powerful and can lead us more in the direction that we're aiming for here.
Well, yeah, those capitals, I think, Ethan, like they will become more and more important to businesses as we see the world change. And we're in a really interesting point in time where a lot of things are changing. And for businesses, they are starting to ask themselves, like, is financial capital the only thing that matters? Well, it can't if there is no crop because there was too much rain, right? Suddenly the social capital, the capital of what the earth brings to the table becomes very, very important, because it also relates to that financial capital. So again, the financial piece being the bridge, the point of understanding, right? Of, oh God, if we want to keep being successful in this way, there are some other consideration points here. And maybe at some point in our lifetime, Ethan, we will see one of the other capitals trump financial capital. But right now, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetime, but let's hope in the next 100 years that another form of capital is more important than just the financial side.
Well, and I think looking towards the future, I mean, Ethan and I started this sort of half as a joke about talking about what a regenerative law firm would look like. And I think maybe one call to action is like what we're talking about, this alternative forms of capital, is like, what does a regenerative accounting firm look like? And what does a regenerative, I don't know, maybe that's the call to action for the future, is like the industry is so focused on like regen ag, how do we get farmers to be more regenerative, where it should be, how do we get a VC firm to be more regenerative? How do we get a legal firm? How do we get distributor be more regenerative?
Well, there's already examples of that, Mike, right? Like Ethan, we both know Saida Abdallah from Jelly Shot. I mean, Saida is running a regenerative marketing and sustainability agency. She's completely flipped that on its head. So it is possible. It's complicated and it can seem like it's getting warped in your mind, but there are organizations out there doing it.
And that's such a great takeaway, because like I started off this podcast with Ethan trying to say, like, how do we get beyond the base mainstream headline of what regeneration is and kind of give it that texture and the nuance? And I think that's one of these. That's one of those things. That's the thing. So
I want to see that though, Mike. I want to see a regenerative accounting firm come out of this podcast.
I'm going to be thinking about that the rest of the weekend, about like, I want to take non-regenerative looking things and make them regenerative, and just think like, what does that look like? Like, I think
we didn't record it, but Mike asked me on the break, he was like, could you do a regenerative cigarette company?
Okay, you can't say that on the recording and not say that. Can you pitch to me?
No, it's too much.
You're not gonna
it's
do
too
it?
big. No, I'm not going to do
much.
it. That's like advanced.
Okay.
That's the next podcast. That's the advanced class. You can come if you can get into the kitchen in Regen House where Karen and I are cooking. Then we'll talk about a regenerative tobacco company.
I thought that was hilarious. Okay, we'll save that for another time. All right, so we're almost at the end of the time. Heather, I want to give you the last words, and I'm going to end the show with something that I usually end the show with. 2 questions. First question is, if you had a magic wand, you could wave it at anything in the world to make the world more regenerative, what would you wave it at?
CEOs.
What about them?
I think that when CEOs start to think in a broader context and they connect with what's happening on the ground and are not just in a boardroom, things really change very fast. I'm a bit controversial, Ethan, you know this, in the industry, for saying every CEO should go to their entire supply network and see what is really going on. That's very scary for a lot of CEOs, because somewhere in the back of their mind, they know that they would make a lot of different decisions if they could see the eyes of the people who they affect on a daily basis. So that is the one thing that I think is, from a business perspective, for me, would be the most powerful, is that every single CEO who had skin in the game on regeneration, who dealt in the food system, went to the ground, we would see outcomes a lot faster than we are right now.
Amazing. And then the second part of the question is, if you had a crystal ball that could tell you anything about the food system related to regeneration in 2035, what would you ask it?
Oh, I would want to know that everything, I mean, obviously I'd want to know that everything that we're doing was getting us somewhere. I mean, it's easy to see in these small systems that we work in comparatively to the whole, but I'd want to know how we were shaking out in terms of outcomes in the next 10 years, and to make sure that or to understand how bigger business, again, I go back to big business because we need them. The natural products movement in particular has taken on a level of nuance that I think is wonderful and that is the gold standard. But without the big guys really participating in this, we will not see the outcome that we need to make big strides from a planetary perspective. It's just impossible if only small companies are doing it. So I'd want to see what the next 10 years hold for them, because it is going to pave the way for everything.
Well said. And on that note, we'll end it here with our guests and say a big thank you and goodbye. Heather, Terry, check out GoodSAM. Karen Rodriguez, Kiss the Ground. You two have been amazing guests. I could have thought of no two better people to have as guests on the show about regeneration. So thank you for the work that you do. Keep up fighting the good fight. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, guys.
Ethan, so we just got done with talking to Heather and Karen. Thoughts? What do you think?
It was awesome. So good to hear each of them dig in on regeneration and how it applies to them. You basically just got like a master class in regenerative storytelling, and like how you need to think about the whole system that the story is going into in order to regenerate ecological agricultural systems of the planet. And then like a master class in regenerative business from Heather Terry as a CEO who just has such clear thinking about how to move things and what the complexity is, but also what the potential is if we can make those changes and transformations in business model.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta hand it to both of them for doing, because you're right. We do live in an existing system that's by and large kind of on the more extractive side. So to come in and try to make an alternative model exist is really hard work. Like, you just face pressure from all angles.
Yeah, but it's also more fun and more fulfilling. And like
Yeah.
the both of those people are some of the like most passionately like engaged in. There's no boredom in their companies. Like there's no like fear and depression about the state of things. Like they are so actively working and moving things that it's like regeneration offers that. It yes, it's hard, but I don't know, not much doing that's not at least a bit of hard work, and it actually turns out to be a lot more fun, especially when you get to some of those regen house parties, and the food is just better. It tastes better, right? It's better
Yeah.
for you. It's healthier. It's amazing.
I love what Karen, I mean, like, so the thing about, like, Karen was talking about storytelling, and I think like there's some business circles that I've encountered where I think you say the word storytelling and they kind of have this adverse reaction to it. They either kind of do one or two things. Some people will just reject it as this, like, or dismiss it as this like touchy feely thing, like, storytelling, that's just so vague. Like, what do you mean by that, right? And it's just like, it just feels like trite, right? And then there's kind of the other angle where I think some people take a negative view on it and they say storytelling is just bullshit. It's just, you're kind of write a narrative that sounds good and you're just trying to fool people. And like, I always bristled at those kinds of reactions because honestly, I think people underplay the value of stories and they don't realize that our entire society, soup to nuts, is built on a story. Like,
Multiple
why,
interlacing
why,
stories. Yeah.
why is the dollar worth what it is, whatever it's worth today? Because we've all, you know, implicitly agreed a story about where the state of the American dollar is relative to others, and then people make decisions buying and trading that on those stories, right? I think, I think they just kind of don't really accept it. But like, if everyone in the world just stopped believing the story that the dollar is the reserve currency, guess what? It's not going to be the reserve currency anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's a
So
bigger point and invitation there when a number of us use the term disruption as we were talking about regeneration. Disruption is core to actually evolving a regenerative paradigm. Um, the invitation is, what is the story that I believe, and what is the story that I'm telling, and what are the origins of that story, and how did I come to know and believe that story? It's the evangelical version that I said regeneration is not, is we have the right new story and you should believe this, and it's regenerative agriculture and this is what you should do. That's proselytizing. Regeneration, in a really like awesome form of it, takes a different approach, and it says, what is your story? How did you get that? Are you sure that's true? Have you engaged with, indigenous farmers growing food, or corporate CEOs who are working on regeneration? Do they have the same story? And by observing, self-observing, and then choosing what is the narrative, and how do we not just follow the patterns that we have been set, but can we regenerate and create new patterns? Could we create businesses in new patterns? A regenerative law firm, a regenerative tobacco company, a regenerative psychology, outfit, a regenerative artist. Like, what does that look like? And can we literally birth new patterns that can take the world in a different direction than it's in now?
So speaking of stories, speaking of birthing new things, Ethan, what do you think the future of regeneration is then?
Regeneration has a very ancient lineage. Um, and I see a number of things happening I'm not going to jump like, it would be fun to do the 100-year plan, or I like even 200-year plans is really
Sure.
useful to think in. I think a lot of what's happening in our current political and cultural polarity and the sort of tension comes from some people doing 50-year plans and acting them out with persistence, and that has actually helped to create the current political and judicial environment that we're in. And so I think looking at and working on those multi-100-year plans is a good idea that we don't spend enough time doing. But I think the future of regeneration in the more like 10 to 20 years out is really going to pick up on this concept that we've touched around the uniqueness of each place and each business as a powerful seed for change. I think that food companies we have this sense of terroir from wine at this point right now. I think we will start to see that in every category of food. I think, Danone will eventually make yogurts that are the unique bacterial cultures for each bioregion in the world, flavored with the sweeteners from that place and the unique nutrient dense superfoods in that place, instead of beet sugar and cane sugar plus strawberry as the same thing everywhere in the world. I think we will have like we were talking about marketing and media companies, I think everybody will not fully relocalize as in they'll get local and then forget about the rest of the world. But I think just like spices, just like spirits and wine that we've talked about, ciders, another one, I think we will get a more diverse sense of a bioregional fingerprint in terms of food, but also in terms of clothing, in terms of beauty products, in terms of durable goods. There will be unique and specific things from each place that embody the multi-hundred-year, multi-thousand, multi-million-year story of each place, and have that incredibly high quality, ease of use, beauty, deliciousness, that really, that can make each place thrive economically while holding on to its uniqueness.
I love the angle you took there, because I think there's another misconception that a lot of people tend to think things that are like sustainable or good for the planet or good for longevity are like sacrifices. Like, I have to give up meat to live a longer life. I have to give up this to live a longer life. The thing you described is actually sounds really fun. Like, to your point, like that sounds
It's
more
so good.
interesting.
It's
Like, I don't.
delicious. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's sexier, and like it's just like it's better, and always it is the highest quality thing of each place, that becoming each place. And when we get agroecological systems that are over yielding polycultures in each place, then there's less of a focus on like, we can't do this, we can't feed the world, because actually
Yeah.
we actually already grow enough food to feed the world, but it will get more diversified locally and more delicious in that way. I also think there will be a growing global community that takes on and helps make regeneration happen in each place, including a sort of like intercultural, biodiverse, psychological, spiritual, geographical, geologically diverse exchange between this uniqueness that is happening in different bioregions. This is part of the like secret longer term plan of Regen House, which I'd love to talk about a bit before we end, to really like have a place, have a home in each of these bioregions around the world that can help people take these steps, if you want to, and transition into the regenerative paradigm that you've heard about in different ways from our guest today.
Ironically, I'm not saying this is regenerative by any means, but that whole kind of reverence for the sense of place and uniqueness of things. The one example that I always hold up that I think gives hope for me that people can assimilate to that fact is the Mexican Coke, because Coke is probably the most unspecific single ingredient. Like, it's supposed to be exactly the same everywhere, and that's kind of how that company was built. But then, like, I've been numerous times to places like a taco joint or something where someone sees a Mexican Coke on the menu and they're just like, ooh, I gotta get that. I'll pay like $5 for that versus a Coke. So again, not a regenerative product per se, but like, I think people will gravitate towards things that are more tied to a place, even for something as ubiquitous as a Coke, just by saying it was from Mexico and it's formulated a little differently. It's in this great glass bottle. That proves enough that you can get people to get excited for it. Like, why can't we do that? Why can't we get a Mexican Coke level reaction out of everything from canned beans to steaks to everything in between?
Yeah, and each
So,
place has its own unique flavors and foods and superfoods. I was just in Jamaica. They've got something there called ackee, which is like the national dish is ackee and fried codfish.
saltfish.
Ackee is
Yeah.
this, it's this amazing, it's it's the aril of a tree crop. So it's a perennial
Yeah.
tree crop that captures carbon, and the flavor, I mean, like it's a superfood. It's almost more fat than it is protein, super low carbs, all these nutrients in it. That's incredible. Nobody eats it outside of Jamaica. That is a unique bioregional fingerprint of that place. That I don't want some multinational to pick it up and make ackee everywhere. You want to be able to get it, especially
Yeah.
when you're there, and in unique small products that come from that place.
I used to live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, so they do have a lot of ackee and saltfish over there. So go check them
Yeah.
out. Two quick things before we get out of here. Tell us what we needed about Regen House. What are you guys doing with it? How is Regen House kind of helping, spread this gospel of all this kind of stuff?
No gospel. I don't have a gospel. Wrong house. You got to go to a church if you want that stuff. Regen House is where we cook good food and hang out and think about 200-year plans and showcase the solutions that are out there in a non-proselytizing, non-missionary way. Regen House is a collaboration between HowGood and EIT Food, as well as the Institute of Regeneration, which I mentioned earlier. And it really grew out of being at some of these global events, at the Climate COP, the Biodiversity COP, at Davos especially, this kind of rare air high up in the mountains where the World Economic Forum and these world leaders all come together. I was there a couple of years ago, and the food was terrible. There was nothing, there was nothing good to eat. Everything was like sugary and wheat and empty, and you got we would go somewhere and they would give you like a little glass of champagne and a little sugary thing, but there was nothing real. There was no food. And so we brought regenerative farmers to Davos with their cheeses and their meats and their vegetables and their hummus, and we did a tasting, and the farmers got up on stage, but then instead of asking the farmers questions, we flipped the script, and we allowed the farmers to ask all the Davos folks questions. Why the
Whoa.
fuck aren't you funding regenerative agriculture? What more could you do? And so we just started to flip the script, and
Love that.
from there, Regen House grew into this venue, this events venue that actually pops up. It's like those amazing restaurants or pop-up restaurants that they only happen for a few days, and you got to get in there to taste it. That's what Regen House is like, but for this growing edge of regenerative food systems around the world. So we popped up at Climate Week last year. We had 42 events in 4 days, 5% of all the in-person events at New York Climate Week. Some of the biggest food companies in the world, some of the smallest, coolest food companies in the world, chefs, farmers, indigenous community members, all coming together to explore how do we accelerate the pace towards regenerative food systems. After that, 10,000 people tried to get in. It was just like we had 500 C-suite folks come through, very high level of conversation, and then we launched and spread throughout the world this year. So we did Davos, we did Sustainable Retail Summit, we went to Expo West, went to South by Southwest, we had our first events there, and now coming up through the rest of the year, we'll be at London Climate Week, and then New York Climate Week in a big way. Then we'll be at the Climate COP in Belém in Brazil. And so it's like the place to come and the home for regenerative food systems conversation and action. And it's open invite, come along, come engage, come take this step, try to, again, like come in the door, have a drink, have a snack, come back the next time, stay for dinner, hang out, come to the dance party. Eventually you come back and, again, like I mentioned before, you come into the kitchen and sit with the chefs from the Future Food Institute, who are kitchen alchemists, and really see how they're transforming food over the conversation, over the soup, the stone soup, where we are transforming the food system.
I love it. I can personally attest to that because I got to throw one of the events at the New York Climate Week Regen House, and the energy is palpable there. It's such a the density of coolness is pretty considerable. So
High
kudos to
nutrient
that. And
density.
high
For
nutrient
sure.
density. All right, last question before we get out of here. I've not asked you this. What's your answer to the crystal ball question? What would you want to ask the crystal ball 10 years from now about the future of regeneration?
Wait, so I'm going 10 years forward and asking a crystal ball to look forward from there?
No. You're asking the crystal ball will tell you anything that you want to know about 10 years from now. What would you
Okay, so
ask
I
it?
get a crystal. You're giving me a crystal ball for right now to look into the future? Mm,
Not answers, questions.
I think I would ask which places and which um, families were the spots on the earth and the um, groups of people, and I mean family in a bigger way, family or community or tribe, which were the ones that in in which regeneration sprouted and was the most magnetizing? Like, is it Juntos Farm in Ibiza, where I visited recently doing incredible regenerative work? Is it the Future Food Institute campus in Japan, or in Polacca in Bologna? Is it some of the regenerative farms that Heather and Saida and GoodSAM works with in Colombia, or on the Ecuadorian coast? What are the places where we can globally, what I would want to know is, where do we double down and invest our multi-capital resources we don't have to change the whole world in 10 years. We just need a few spots that are really humming, that everybody wants to go to, that the food is coming out of, the bioregional products, the business innovations, the law firms, right? Where are the places where these ecosystems of enterprises sprout up that are heading towards that 12 to 23% that Karen talked about, that will hit the tipping point for the rest of the world?
I think of no better way to kind of end on that, to think about where can we go next to try to not only just wait for that to happen, but to make it happen, right? I think the paradox of the crystal ball question is that we don't necessarily have to wait for the crystal ball to tell us what had happened. We can kind of engineer the answer in a way by putting our attention in certain places. And as part of the community that travels in a lot of the circles, in the same circles, I look forward to us kind of seeing each other at these different things and trying to create those answers for the crystal ball. So, Ethan, I want to thank you for being such a great co-host on this. Like you said, you were literally the immediate first person I thought of when it came to regeneration to bring onto this show for this. And hope everybody checks out all the work Ethan does, not only at HowGood, but with Regen House and all the other things that he does out there. So, Ethan, thanks for your time. And thanks for listening, everybody out there. This has been the Tomorrow Today Show, all about the future of regeneration. Now, for yet another perspective on regenerative agriculture and storytelling, here's a special bonus interview I did with Paige Graham, SVP of Social Impact and Sustainability at Edelman PR. With her extensive background helping companies like PepsiCo and General Mills, Paige illuminates how established food brands can authentically communicate their regenerative agricultural practices and build meaningful narratives. Here's my conversation with Paige. Hope you enjoy. All right, we're here with Paige Graham of Edelman. She's the SVP of Social Impact and Sustainability at Edelman, a leading global communications firm. Paige, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So we're talking about the future of regeneration, and you work with your clients who sell to and communicate to the consumer, sort of the last mile of the communications chain when we're talking about regenerative. What do you? Let's try to frame these challenges. Like, what do you think the significant challenges are in kind of communicating regenerative agriculture to just the average American food buyer? I'm not even talking about like the ahead of the game, like Patagonia person, just a regular
Yeah.
person just trying to buy groceries. How do you
Yeah.
explain regen to them?
Um, it's a very good question, and it's a really important distinction that you made. I think the average food buyer, there, I do think it's really important, or how we work with our clients and what we found to be successful is when you think about the type of language and framing and storytelling techniques, is that really keeping a mindset and having a goal about creating or making connections, right? So if you, think about how we create connections as humans, it's not with metrics or technical language. And like, hey, I work in this space, I love data, but talking about how a certain number of metric tons of CO2e is avoided is not relatable, right? Yes, it's important, but it's not relatable to the average buyer. So we really see success and believe that we need to focus on the so what, like the so what of regenerative ag practices, the so what of why or the value of a product that was grown with ingredients, or that is made up of ingredients that were grown with those practices. It's the so what to you, to me, to your family, to the community. I would argue also to the farmer, and showing how regenerative agriculture can really address human problems. We found that many consumers do want climate friendly lifestyles, and I'm putting that in quotes, right? But they need to see how climate solutions can make their lives better, um, not make their lives more expensive, right? So we also need to be optimistic and move away from fear-based motivators or fear-based storytelling, right? The doom and gloom of the impacts of climate change, which are real and again important, but we find that optimism empowers climate action. And it makes me think of some results we had from an Edelman trust barometer. So Edelman has been studying trust in institutions, government, business, NGOs, and the media for decades now. And we have an annual trust barometer, but we also, as a supplement to that, do special reports. And we've done a special report for a couple of years now on climate change, and found that the best ways to convert climate pessimists to climate optimism is seeing news and storytelling that gives you hope. It helps you believe that solutions will provide a personal and societal benefit, and then believing again that climate friendly lifestyles or choosing products that um, you feel and that you are aware that were grown in a way that is beneficial to the environment and to communities, showing that that's attractive and will help you keep joy in your life. So it's the balance of human-centric storytelling to create a connection, and then showing that making this choice can add value to your lives, can keep you happy, can let you feel good about the things that you're buying. And it's hard.
So a lot of carrot versus using the stick. Yeah. It's ironic because I think, like, in our personal lives, if something bad happened, like an emergency, like you're in a car crash or something, or you're a health thing, it kind of jolts you into action, you know? I guess, like climate's like a slow moving car crash, right? So it's just interesting that people don't react the same in a mass capacity to bad things. But I agree. I think there's too much of the like the stat. There's only 60 years of topsoil left that gets bandied around a lot. I get why that's important. I don't know what people do about it, right? And so, like, I don't know, what are some of the are there anecdotes that, like, story hooks or different things that you've kind of, advised on that seem to work better than others? Like, what's the positive reinforcement look like?
And I mean, a lot of things that we find benefited is, again, really goes back to, and not to be repetitive, but like making a connection um, to the actual human. So then this case would be the farmer behind the product that you're buying, and showing the care and the effort, every day in the field, right? The whole family is involved, really showing that care and the humanity that goes into growing an ingredient that then becomes something in a product on a shelf in a grocery store, maybe in a
Yeah.
bigger urban environment.
Yeah.
Um, is certainly something that we lean into,
Yeah.
and that we find consumers are, when it is delivered to them in a bite-sized way, right? An appropriate channel, and meets them where they are, is effective.
Yeah. How do you do that in sort of an authentic way? Because I think, like, big brands kinda suffer this challenge where sometimes it's almost like no matter what they say, it just seems like people don't know where it's coming from, or if this was like an actor or something like that. Like, how do you kinda give cues to people that here's an authentic person telling a real story? Because we kinda live in a society today where everyone's got their, BS meter up really, really high, right? So you've gotta
Yeah.
convey that differently, but, like, what have you found has worked to, like, show people, like, "No, this is real, this is real."
I mean, not have something be overly produced or polished. have it be, not, have somebody who is, and again, it depends on the appropriate channel, right? But like not a slick executive in a suit, somebody with like mud on their boots, right? It really is something that we found to be effective. And it's something that is relatable because typically, an average consumer, um, one is going to be really interested because we also hear that obviously, more and more people are interested in how their food is grown and raised, but likely don't have access to a farmer or can head out to, a farm and see how something is grown and raised. So it's
Yeah.
really just kind of that behind the scenes look at farms, day in the life, short TikTok reels that, maybe you're like are shaky, right? That's fine, like not overly produced or edited, but just the reality, not with the Instagram kind of like sheen over it all or filters or things like that.
I mean, that is such an interesting phenomenon that I think jettisoned TikTok to the center, where it was like being raw and having crappy camera angles and having it be kind of fuzzy became a benefit, not a curse,
Mhm.
It just felt real. So if you're thinking about food brands and you think about like, clearly it sounds like an educational process, right? Like, what do you think a brand's role is in kind of taking people on this educational journey, right? You mentioned you got to start with something relatable. You got to start with something that feels real, emotional hook. Where do you kind of go from there if you've successfully done that?
Yeah, I mean, I often, I not often, I counsel my clients also to just taking a couple step back. So even like before you can authentically communicate about the work that you're doing in regenerative ag is making sure that like your house is in order, right? Like that your operations are in order, that you have invested the time and the resources in the programs across your supply chain and that you can show your work and show your receipts before you ever consider engaging consumers about it, right? Like I want to make sure that there's a lot of trust that needs to be earned and that before, to your point, you can really effectively engage consumers who are bombarded with claims on and certifications on labels and all types of messaging, sometimes unfortunately misleading marketing claims. So before you even put your toe in that, take a step back and make sure that you've done a lot of the work internally to get your house in order. And for this topic, for regenerative ag practices, it's really about making sure that you've done the work, I believe, to elevate farmers at the center of your programs, right? Have you invested in helping farmers make the transition, right? It's hard. This isn't easy for farmers to do. They want to do it. They want to, the farmers that I speak to, they want to provide and they want to grow and provide what consumers want to buy, right? Like they're running a business that they're smart. That makes sense. But they're going to need help if to make these transitions. So any big brand, if they're going to tout and talk about the importance of regen ag, I feel very strongly needs to have invested the time and the work and the resources, and sometimes that is financially, to help de-risk the transition to regen ag for farmers. And then make sure that that commitment is a long haul commitment, right? It's not just funneling some resources or some dollars into one pilot program in one sector, right? Like you're really committed to helping scale the transition.
Yeah. And so get your house in order before you start. I mean, that's the best example, right? I guess
Mhm.
get your own house in order. What have you seen brands been able to do once they kind of have an operation that meets that criteria, right? I mean, are there certain angles that seem to work better than others? Like, is it talking about soil? Is it talking about less inputs? Is it talking about more delicious, nutritious produce coming out? Like, what are some of the things that seem to work for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think a benefit of the house in order is also too it really helps strengthen your relationship with the farmers and growers and your supply chain.
Yeah.
ideally, right? Or members of your team, or you're working through a farmer-led organization or a group, a coalition of farmers, right? Depending on the size and scale of your operation. Um, so you have those insights and you have that perspective to then leverage that as appropriate, and use that to inform your messaging, and your engagement strategies for consumers. I with a lot of the brands that I work with, a lot of it is executives speaking on global stages, talking about the work that they're doing. And yes, I do because I work in the space, a chief sustainability officer at a global or multinational CPG. But like, really, where the true like nuggets is when he or she doesn't talk about their strategy. It's when he or she talks about, I was visiting with a corn farmer in Iowa, and these are the challenges that they're facing, and this is how they're adapting it, and this is how we are able to support. That's where we see like the stronger storytelling angles can kind of really come through, is not from what the company is doing, but what the company has learned from the work on the ground in the field with the people doing the work day to day to grow whatever ingredient that's going into the product that we're buying or selling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it occurred to me that what you're saying is like to effectively really communicate this, like getting your house in order thing is not a trivial thing. I
Hmm.
mean, that can take a decade, right? So I guess like is there something you can do while you're kind of getting that house in order to communicate it so you don't have to wait a decade to convert a million, acres into regenerative farmland
No, it's totally a good point. Like, I realize what I'm saying is not a easy
overnight?
thing to do.
Yeah.
I very much agree it is important, and it is even more important when it comes to conversations of greenwashing, right, and credibility. Um, I would also say that in this space, for that reason, right, like climate solutions, whether it is a regenerative ag or anything else, like, not to use the cliche or the phrase, but there's no one silver bullet, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the times companies are setting goals or targets where the innovation or the technology or the industry collaboration to achieve that target like doesn't exist yet, right? So we have to do some research, we have to innovate to figure it out. And I would say then for a company, that on both of these journeys might be on the earlier side, it's just the concept and a mindset of radical transparency, right? Like, and I say this, if I put myself as a consumer, an average American buyer, like, I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I'm not perfect,
Yeah.
but I am expecting you to, when you say something, that you have put in the effort and that you've tried things and that you've learned from that. So if I think about then how that translates to communication, the concept of radical transparency, it is a brand being like, hey, we tried insert effort here. And like, it didn't work. Like, we wish we were successful all the time, but this didn't work. But we learned XYZ. So moving forward, we're going to do ABC because of that. Right. And just being a little bit vulnerable as well.
And that can be a scary place to be in as a corporation. Like, how do you kind of get people over the hump?
I mean, the scary place to be is true. Um, I would say working with clients, it's the relationships with their legal team, which sometimes they may or may not want to involve in the conversations earlier rather than later. We always
Sure.
push for earlier. Like, that's really important.
Yeah.
Um, I would also just show them, like, case studies, right, that we see of, one of, I think, a really good example, and it's not related to this topic of regen ag, is Lego, right? Like, so Lego had set a target that they were going to use, and I don't want to get the specifics wrong, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe, transition to um, renewable or recycled plastic, rPET, for their bricks, right? And they tried a lot of different innovations to make that happen. And then they realized, well, crap, doing that would actually increase our carbon emissions. And they had set a public goal, they were very vocal about it. But then when they invested the time and the effort to do that, they realized there was an unintended negative impact of that. And so they were very, very direct in their communication of like, look, we set this goal and we tried X, Y, and Z. And we realized that, hey, like that transition is not gonna work out for us in the way that we thought it was gonna be. So now we're evolving and we're reevaluating. We are
Yeah.
not abandoning our goals of including more rPET in our products, but we're gonna approach it maybe from a different way. And from an earned media, from a peer standpoint, the reaction to that was mostly positive, neutral to positive, and it could have gone a variety of other ways. And so that's a
Well,
really good case study, I think, to share too.
and that comes back to your earlier point about having your house in order, because I feel like Lego has been one of those brands that people just kind of generally love and trust, throughout history, no matter what. So the second they kind of show like, oops, we missed the target on something, people are probably more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt because they already trusted them, Whereas if you didn't trust a brand already and they showed that, a consumer might just be like, they're doing it again, so you want to get
Yeah.
out of that kind of thing. Okay. And ironically, I think that goes to the spirit of regenerative is, like you said, there's no silver bullets. This is regenerative farming is a holistic effort, not just looking at soil, not just looking at this or that, looking at the whole thing. What I'm hearing from you is that the communications of regenerative is also a holistic thing, regenerative kind of communication. We have a question we love to ask everybody here, and I'm going to ask this to you: is if you had a crystal ball that could tell you anything about the food system in 2035, what do you think you would ask it?
It is a really good question. Do I just get one question? Or is this a 3 wishes type
Let's
of
start with
situation?
one. No, well,
Teasing you.
you could
I'm
probably do a
teasing.
3 wishes thing. Yeah, but
I'm
where
teasing.
would you start that conversation, I guess?
I'm personally really interested in how we will continue to integrate new innovation, AI, machine learning with what I would say are quote unquote traditional practices like regenerative ag practices. Like the practices are not net new. Farmers and indigenous, communities have been doing many of them for generations. There's certainly a resurgence now and really prioritizing the soil health benefit of that. But I'm very interested in like the balance and the unique combinations between new, AKA like technology, AI, and quote unquote old, those types of practices and the unique combinations that different sectors or different commodities or farmers and groups in different regions across the globe are employing to reduce their benefit and then while continuing yield and the quality of products. So I would be very interested to see if like really interesting combinations of the new and the old.
Yeah, what's the split, right? How much, or
Mhm.
what did we take from tech, and what did we take from kind of old world knowledge?
Mhm.
Um, I too want to know that, because I constantly think about that tension that we exist in. Is what do we keep? From
Yeah.
both. Both have good ideas, and we probably need
Yeah.
both in the
And it goes
future.
to that like trial and error of like, hey, we tried this and this. Well, maybe this worked in my mint supply chain in this country. And so now there could be some similarities if I take it and bring it over here. Like that type of trial and error and just not being quote unquote afraid to fail a bit is where I feel like there will be a lot of cool, or I hope there will be a lot of cool advancements.
That's a good message to send to brands, big and small. Kind of own your process, be upfront about it, be honest, be humble, and just try to do the best you can to move towards a better kind of world, and share that story with people. So, Paige, thank you for sharing some of your story with us. Thank you for coming on to the show, and yeah, keep
Yeah.
on fighting the good fight.
And you too. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Tomorrow Today Show. The Tomorrow Today Show is a production of the Spoon Podcast Network, with writing, hosting, editing, and music by me, Mike Lee. Stay tuned for more episodes to come in Season 1.